to 4,400 after 16 weeks' employment. Nurses and midwives also work a longer 39-hour week. There is a reality in this situation which needs to be accepted by government. Despite the threats of a withdrawal of the general pay increases, along with increases to address lower pay for new entrants and the loss of increments, 95% of nurses voted for strike action. And the government can't ignore that reality. These strikes will go ahead, and at some stage the government has to change its stance and enter meaningful negotiations. It has been said that negotiations started yesterday. I'd like to know how meaningful they were. I will be contacting the INMO and the P&A to ask them that. And the government should accept the nurses' claim for parity and agree a process as to how it will be achieved in a reasonable timeframe. There is a clause in the Public Service Agreement which allows for review in relation to recruitment and retention, which would allow for not just talks but a solution to the issues in this dispute without collapsing the general agreement. And to be quite honest, I find it quite repulsive listening to some of the debate going on in the airwaves and the media. The Fine Gael TDs, who have accepted a 7,358 increase since 1st of January 2017 under the restoration of pay of FEMPI, and General Secretaries of unions who received that same sort of increase, can come out and attack nurses for taking this action after going through all the industrial relations process that they could possibly go through. It's the last action that workers can take if they know, not just feel, they're not listened to. This private member's motion will be passed, and rather than simply ignoring it as just another lost vote like the government did in relation to the Sinn Féin motion last year, the government should take seriously the views of a majority here in this House and the public views and patients' views and act accordingly and resolve this situation.
I'm stuck for time. It looks like I have about 2 minutes. So just in that context, I would like to say I have no hesitation in supporting the action taken by the nurses, not because I wish to see a strike, but because if you look at what the nurses are actually saying, and I welcome them to the gallery, it's really not about pay and conditions. It's about providing a safe health service. And in the absence of sufficient staff, Minister, a safe health service cannot be provided. And I had the privilege of being elected locally in 1999 in Galway, and I sat on a health forum. And I have to say I find it deeply unacceptable, really, Fianna Fáil's attitude. I find it very hard to take them seriously because they presided over the privatisation of the public health service and the systematic running down of it, which Fine Gael and Labour unfortunately took over. And so a safe health system cannot be provided with inadequate staff. I know that personally, I know that professionally. My own family know that on a personal basis, the pressure that staff are under in Galway. If we look at the context to their strike, we see the figures on trolleys. More than 8,750 patients. Now, figures are thrown out here, so I'm going to repeat them because this is simply for Galway and Ballinasloe. 8,750 on trolleys and chairs. If I pick any particular day in Galway, an 80-year-old woman on a trolley for 3 days. On the 11th of April last year, 58 on trolleys. I can pick any figure, or I can quote Dr. Hickey, who has come out very honestly and openly to tell us that every year between 300 and 350 people die prematurely because of time on trolleys. But mostly what I know is that we have an unsafe health system, despite the best efforts of nurses and doctors, because we've systematically run that down. And we are looking at the consequences of that every single day. Earlier on, Deputy Adams read out a letter. I also got that letter, as other people did. A woman who's facing an essential test on the day that the nurses strike, and notwithstanding that, she said, I support the nurses. I think it's an absolute disgrace, Minister, as a junior minister, that you're here on your own in an empty chamber with not a single Fine Gael colleague here to support you. That tells an absolute story of itself. Thank you. No, you're on my trip. You're fine.
Be here supporting the motion and the amendment because I think recent attempts really in the national airwaves and by some members of the Houses through the Sunday newspapers to in fact control the narrative of the reality of the lives of nurses and midwives' pay and working conditions, and the reason why they've been forced into industrial action has been largely discredited by the nurses and their union, and I think has been discredited in the minds of the general public, who are absolutely lock, stock and barrel standing behind the nurses. And the INMO are clear that this dispute is about safe staffing in the public health service, something that's very precious to all of our citizens. And the fact that the HSE hasn't been able to recruit and retain enough nurses and midwives on current pay scales. Now, the narrative, as far as I'm concerned, belongs to those directly affected. I don't have the time to tell their stories, as they've done so eloquently themselves on social media, but a summary of one of them was when she said, all of the nurses have stories like this. We go home sore and sad and tired. We do our best, but we've had enough. We need more nurses. We need better pay and conditions. Please listen to us when we say we need help. And that's the message that's coming out here loud and clear. Since embarking on a programme of austerity, governments successively have undermined the health service and the professions of nursing and midwifery, and there is a cost to that, not just on the shoulders of nurses but also on patients. It's not adequate. The INMO have highlighted previously we're losing Irish-trained staff to the UK and other mainly English-speaking countries, and then the HSE's response is to recruit from outside. It's not cost-effective to pay out over 100 million every year on agency staff when we should be using our resources to create good jobs and retain qualified people in the public service. We need action on this, and we need it dealt with now.
Thank you, Deputy Daly. Now, Deputy Matthew McGrath sharing with Deputy Collins and Deputy Healy-Rae.
I'm happy to speak on the motion this evening. I want to say at the outset I fully support the nurses' pay claims and welcome the representative today. As the INMO have made clear, its members are comprehended by the Public Service Stability Agreement 2018-2020. As per Section 3 of that agreement, the Public Sector Pay Commission examined the underlying difficulties in recruitment and retention of staff and issued its report in September 2018. Its purpose was to recommend measures to address the recruitment and retention difficulties. The proposals that came from the Public Service Pay Commission were considered at a special delegate conference of the INMO on 26th of September 2018, and the decision of that conference was that the recommendations would not solve the difficulties in recruitment and retention, and therefore that all public sector members should be balloted. As we all know, this action is an action of last resort. It is indicative not just of the complete and utter failure of this incompetent and abysmal Minister for Health. It is also a sign that there is no political will, you Minister McGrath either, no political will to actually listen to the nurses. And you in the Independent Alliance have a position if you'd use it, rather than talking about Santa Claus caps going around knocking on doors at Christmas Eve. I mean, you're in government, tail wagging the dog, but you're not wagging anyone's tail, you're doing nothing for the people, you've abandoned them. The Psychiatric Nurses Association have outlined the impact of service delivery and patient care as a result of non-implementation of the Vision for Change. The removal of 76% of beds with the development of only 30% of community services. We all know that. It's appalling and Tipperary. We have one long-stay psychiatric bed. According to the PNC, to currently maintain decent, adequate and minimal services, the mental health services have an unsustainable reliance on agency and overtime as a consequence of the inability to recruit and retain nurses. The HSE spend £1 million a week on agency and £300,000 per week on mental health services. This over-reliance on agency and overtime is detrimental to the provision of comprehensive mental health service. We all know that, and you know that. This is damning. What will it take for this atrocious minister, your colleague, Minister Harris, for Health to resign or be fired? He's walking the Irish health services into total meltdown, and yet he remains in place when any other minister with any ounce of political humility would have offered resignation or would be dragged out or kicked out by ye colleagues. And I'm not a peep out of ye. When you were over here, Minister McGrath, you were well able to jump up and down, what you wouldn't do. But now you have the price of power and you have abandoned the people. As I said, as if this strike wasn't bad enough, I received another email from a paramedic, a National Ambulance Service and a member of the PNA recently. This person wrote, I would like to make you aware that I'm impending, and I'm not giving his name, impending strike action with the National Ambulance Service on the 22nd of January. This will result in widespread disruption in the provision of services to the public, particularly in rural areas. There we have it. Abandon the people. Let them die in the fields. The nurses, any of us that go into A&E and the hospitals know what they do. They work to do and how hard they work and how hard they try, and a dedicated duty. It's a vocation for 99% of them, and they do their best. We give them no support, only lip service, so support them.
Thank you, I stood here last night in this chamber and talked of the disgrace our health service has become. Both the Irish Nurses and Midwives organisation, the INMO, and the Psychiatric Nurses Association of Ireland, the PNA, have served notice of industrial action for the week ahead. Both unions have been forced into taking such action for the interest of patients and everyone who uses public health service. Nurses and midwives are the lowest paid graduate professionals in our health service. This isn't acceptable, Minister. It is no wonder that the health service has difficulty in recruitment and the retention of nurses. The number of staff nurses fell by 6% between 2008 and 2018. But on the other hand, our health service experienced an increase in demand. Not only does this have an adverse impact on patient care, the cost of agency nurses to the taxpayer, £1.4 million per week, which is a staggering £72.8 million per year. Our health service is hemorrhaging money when this money is badly needed in the health service to create more respite beds, reducing waiting times, to provide new equipment, to hire more permanent staff. All of these factors would greatly increase the working conditions for nurses and would encourage new nurses and the retention of current nurses. At the moment, there is only one applicant for every 4 nursing and midwifery vacancies in the health service. The government needs to see the seriousness of this and act quickly to tackle this problem. I have criticised this government before for putting their heads in the sand, and I am afraid that they are doing it again. Figures released this week show that the number of patients left waiting daily on trolleys in hospitals nationwide has already exceeded the 600 mark. The high trolley figures come just before strikes by nurses. This government needs to realise that we have a high number of people who are now waiting on trolleys. These figures are going to rise substantially when the nursing strike commences. I woke up to the real facts of what's happening at all, Minister. Our nurses work extremely hard in very poor conditions. In my own constituency area, West Cork, I've seen firsthand the Trojan work the nurses carry out in nursing homes and community hospitals in Bandon, Kinsale, Clonakilty, Skibbereen, Bantry, Dunmanway and Castletownbere, in these community hospitals and nursing homes. I know from talking to nurses on the ground that no one wants to go on strike, but in reality our nurses' hands have been tied and they have no option, and I support our nurses as they deserve better pay conditions. Where will we find the money? The government says. In the last number of years he's been accepting pay increases, politicians in here, and the nurses have been forgotten. That's the way with most of the politicians. They haven't, but others have. And I'm calling on this government to engage immediately with the INMO and the PNA to resolve the dispute and to address the demands of the nurses. These nurses deserve parity in their pay to that of the other healthcare professionals. It is high time that this government listen to the people that elected them to power. The people and nurses of Ireland have a voice, and this voice needs to be heard. Minister. Deputy Healy-Rae to conclude.
I'm glad to get the opportunity to talk on behalf of the nurses here tonight, and I recognise their pay claim and supported 100%. I'm glad to see that many nurses up here in the gallery and some from Kerry, and glad to see all here, and we're all with you 100%. Minister, and we have 5 ministers for health, and you're one of them. But and you're all well paid, I'm sure. But no, but nurses can't be done without, and it is a fact that many young graduates are going abroad because they can get more properly remunerated, properly paid and better conditions. And when we talk about conditions, I was so sad the other evening. I met a girl who I knew very well wearing a neck brace, and she will never again work because she was assaulted in her workplace as a nurse, and she tried to go back to work and twice, but now she has been told that she's in serious danger of becoming invalided if she tries to work again, and that's her story after giving all and she could to patients and in the supporting and working for our health system. We all know how hard nurses work, and there are too little of them on the ground, and we know that the kind of pressure they're under, because I was behind that in Tralee General myself when my father was there, and there's always patients pressing the button, which is their right, looking for help and assistance, and someone has to come to them, and it's the nurse who has to come, and they're just not enough of them at present in our hospitals. And I have to thank especially the nurses who are working in Tralee General, in the Bonds, and in Killarney Community Hospital, Dingle, Bantry, Carsaveen, and Killarney, who work so hard to keep our patients, to try to tend to them all. And you know, I see the amount of pressure that they're under when they take over the shift and do their rota. They have to do so much paperwork before they get going, and then they're behind because there's patients in need of attention, and we all know the pressure they're under. But look, Minister, it's no problem in the world for you to give 3 times as much now for the Children's Hospital. What? Maybe 3 or 4 times the original cost. That's what's happening. You're not on top of your game at all. But one thing we are sure of.
Wants 30 seconds, so
yeah, he must pay the nurses and full stop properly.
Yes. All right. Count caller. Literally 30 seconds.
Literally, Count caller, I just want to put my shoulder to the wheel in support of the nurses. Every one of us have had family members who have benefited from the care and the attention that they've received from the nurses. So it's only right that all of us inside this house should say to you in government, please see after the nurses, because it's the nurses who see after us and the people before us.
Very short one.
To have the opportunity to speak in this debate and to have the opportunity to discuss the issues before us and the looming crisis that is coming down the line in respect of the likely nurses' strike. And I particularly want to pledge my support to the amendments to this motion, which the Social Democrats are very happy to support, and those amendments relate to the issues raised by Sinn Féin in particular. There's no need to recite the problems in our health service. We're all too familiar with those. They're very serious problems. We spend more in this country than most other countries spend on their health service, and yet there is a huge amount of unmet need. There's very poor access. In no other country do so many people have to pay up front to access the most basic health services. And, you know, we desperately need system change. But whether we're talking about trying to operate the existing system in a better way, or reforming the system and moving to a new and more modern public health service, there is one obstacle that is impossible to see how we can overcome without drastic action, and that is the obstacle of the serious problem, the crisis in recruitment and retention. And that applies right across the board within the health service for most disciplines, but it's particularly acute when it comes to nurses and all kinds of nurses. And that's where the biggest crisis is. And this crisis has been flagged for some time by both the INMO and the PNA. And government has persisted in ignoring the looming crisis. And indeed, I'd have to say the Taoiseach's attitude, his flippant and dismissive tone that he's been using in relation to this issue is entirely unhelpful. And in fact, it's insulting to the nurses at the centre of this dispute. It's time that the Taoiseach, the Minister and indeed the Cabinet woke up to the looming crisis that's coming down the tracks. And it's very hard to see how we're going to avoid the crisis of a nurses' strike over multiple days unless government takes urgent action to address the matter. Look, we know that in terms of the general shortages that exist at the moment with nurses, undoubted shortages, those shortages are causing huge problems, particularly in relation to theatre nurses. And, you know, this isn't an issue of a shortage of beds or a shortage of theatres or equipment or indeed a shortage of consultants. The main reason why procedures are cancelled is as a result of a shortage of theatre nurses. So, let's be clear about that. That's where the problem lies at the moment, and that's what must be addressed before we talk about building more hospital beds or more hospitals or whatever. We also know, of course, that in relation to the maternity services, those services must be midwife-led. And again, there are serious shortages there. When we look at the community, where previously, we would have had good quality, seamless services right across the community in terms of children's health, in terms of vaccination programmes, developmental checks, all of those key areas that are provided by public health nurses. And again, basic services for children not being provided because of a dire shortage of public health nurses, and particularly in the Dublin area. And then, of course, that's looking at the system as it is at the moment. But, everybody in this House, theoretically, has signed up to the reform programme that is Sláintecare. And Sláintecare sees nurses being at the very heart of the delivery of health services. And that's how it should be, because nurses, Irish nurses in particular, are extremely highly qualified and are capable of delivering, in the main, our public health services. And, we've talked for years about the need to reform the model of care, to get away from the expensive hospital-based care system, and to bring services locally into the community. And at the heart of those community services are nurses. We also talk about the need for an emphasis on prevention and early intervention. And again, it's nurses who we need to deliver those services. For 20 years now, we've been talking about the need to address the huge issue of chronic illness management within our health service. And we know that up to 80% of the burden of the health service relates to chronic illness management. And yet, we've very few of the chronic illness programmes. It's nurses and senior nurse managers who are equipped to lead out in those programmes and who should be providing those programmes if the Minister and the Department of Health have any sense and realise that that is the key to addressing the shortages or the log jams within the health service. And we need clinical nurse managers and we need nurses right across the board to deliver those services. We also know, of course, that we're facing a massive challenge in relation to our ageing population and the need to provide community services to support people living in their own homes for as long as they possibly can, with those necessary supports. And again, in relation to, the home care supports, home help services, all of that has to be or should be overseen, managed and supervised by nurses. So that's what the reform programme is about. It's about switching to a different model of care. It's about getting much better value for money and improving access for people to health services. And we can't do that unless we have sufficient nurses. Look, nurses are voting with their feet at the moment. It is undeniable that at the root of this problem is the fact that pay is unacceptably low at the moment. There is no reason why highly qualified nurses should be at the bottom of the professionally qualified healthcare staff that we have in this country, and that is the situation at the moment, both from the point of view of the starting point on the pay scale and also then in relation, of course, to as you go up the pay scale and the incremental improvements. And at each stage in that, nurses are €7,000 per year behind their equivalent colleagues working in other health disciplines, therapists and so on. So, that is an enormously big gap that is quite frankly insulting to nurses who are just as highly qualified as other health professionals working at the coalface, just as highly qualified as the range of allied health professionals, and yet they're lagging so far behind. We also know, of course, that nurses are in huge demand. There's a big market for well-qualified English-speaking nurses, as our nurses are. And there are lots of different packages on offer right across the world, in places where it can be much more pleasant to live, in places where it's much more affordable to live, and those packages still are better than what are on offer here, in spite of a lower cost and lower living costs in other countries. So we need to value our nurses. We need to recognise that we are facing a real crisis. We need to say that unless urgent action is taken to ensure that there is pay parity between nurses and other health professionals, that we are going to continue to hemorrhage nurses from our health service. Our health service is in crisis at the moment. If we lose more nurses, it will collapse. And we're very close to that tipping point where our health service is going to collapse. I'd call on the Minister, call on the Taoiseach to wake up and see what's happening before our eyes and avert this crisis before it's too late. Thank you.
Deputy Smith, who's sharing with 4 colleagues. Deputy Smith.
Thank you very much, Concorla. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the nurses, the members of the INMO and also the Psychiatric Nurses Association here tonight in the gallery. It's great to see you folks, and thank you for taking the time to listen to the debate. Our nurses and midwives are the backbone of our public service, the length and breadth of this country, and Cavan General Hospital and Monaghan IMU unit are exceptional when it comes to the energy, the passion, the dedication and an exemplary example of service provided to patients in the north east of the region. Just as an example, Cavan General Hospital has an emergency department that sees patients of up on 30,000 plus per annum, and patient numbers keep growing and growing, Minister. It is our nurses that are the lifeblood of our hospitals, but there is a huge problem, and the problem is with recruitment and retention, and this is an issue that must be addressed. Before Christmas, the RCSI Hospital Group has informed me that 42 vacancies across the 2 hospitals, that being Cavan General Hospital and Monaghan Minor Injuries Unit, the majority of which are in the nursing profession. I appreciate that the efforts are underway locally to try and attract nurses, but this all feeds back to the bigger issue, Minister, and that is the issue of pay and conditions for nurses, midwives and psychiatric nurses. The government needs to examine why they cannot attract nurses, and I'm confident the answer you get will be very similar to the answer that I get from nurses in Cavan and Monaghan, and that is stress and pay. The terms and conditions being offered by the HSE is significantly less attractive than that is available to them in countries abroad, and it's creating a real human resources problems within our hospitals. Cavan General Hospital, Monaghan Minor Injuries Unit, the workload that is expected of professionals is untenable. Figures released to me via a parliamentary question recently showed that over 25,000 people attended our emergency department unit in Cavan General Hospital in the first 9 months of 2018, which was an increase of 2.9% for the same period in 2017. Minister, we have a fabulous facility in Monaghan Minor Injuries Unit that provides top-class service. Again, speaking with the staff myself, they want to expand that service. Currently it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. They want to provide 24-hour service. They've got the enthusiasm, the commitment and the passion and the capacity to do it. However, the biggest problem for them and for you, Minister, will be recruitment. So the facility is there, it complements what goes on in Cavan General Hospital, but you must address recruitment. And to address recruitment, you must address terms and conditions. So, Minister, I earnestly ask you to please listen to the professionals who are here in the gallery tonight. They know what they're talking about.
Thank you, Concorla. First of all, I'd like to welcome the nurses in the gallery into this debate tonight. I suppose I'm glad to see that the Minister for Finance has joined us. For long periods of this debate, we've had no member of Fine Gael in the chamber, and the person in charge of the money. It is good that he's here to hear what's been said in the House. And nurses provide an essential service to our communities. And I'm not going to repeat what has been said by others, but we've all had experiences in hospitals. And nurses, you cannot overvalue the service they give to the communities. But while this dispute is about pay, I think has been said by a number of speakers already, working conditions and the conditions that nurses at the moment have to work in, and the stress that is bringing to their lives, are a huge part of their grievances at the moment. And, you know, the two major hospitals that service my constituency, Clonmel and University Hospital Limerick, unfortunately are two glaring examples of that. And I was in Limerick University Hospital last weekend, and you know, to work in the crowded and cramped conditions that they're being asked to work in there is unreal. And you know, you would be exhausted yourself when you'd come out from visiting a patient, and to try and work there for a long shift and to deal with the amount of patients they have to deal with is putting extreme pressure on this valued profession. Do you know the pay claim that the nurses have brought before us? You know, it's no good saying that, you know, this is going to bring other pay claims across the public sector. The nurses have balloted for strike action. We have to face up to that situation, and we have to meet it head on. I think their case is crystal clear. They are underpaid at the moment. We are failing to recruit nurses into the service. We're finding it very hard to maintain staff, and we have to address the issues that have been raised by the nurses.
Nurses are the first and the last to witness both the beginning and the end of life, dispensing care, compassion and comfort along the way. They live very demanding lives and absolutely are deserving of our support and our solidarity now more than ever. The fact that nurses and midwives have the lowest core salary for graduate professionals in the health service is a scandal. The fact that it has taken so long for the government to meet or engage with the Irish Nurses and Midwives organisation is a scandal. Nurse numbers are going down while the population is going up, and the only way to address our recruitment and retention crisis in nursing and midwifery is to address the issue of pay. And in saying that, this is not just about pay. Nobody goes into nursing expecting to make a fortune, but the least that they can expect or deserve is to have a decent standard of living for themselves and for their families. 4 nursing jobs are available in Ireland for every qualified nurse applying. That's just incredible. Intensive care units and operating theatres around the country are among the worst hit, and I've checked that out with Naas and Portlaoise, my own local hospitals. I spoke to 2 young nurses from my constituency this morning. One is now living and working in Dubai, enjoying a far higher salary and far better working conditions. The other is still working in Ireland, one of only 2 from her class of 80 who actually remained in Ireland. She has been back to college 4 times since then to further her nursing education and has only stayed in Ireland due to family commitments. She described her nursing colleagues as tired, worn out and stressed due to the understaffing issues in their hospital. A commitment to reviewing nursing and midwifery salaries was given in 2006, and this remains to be honoured. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corda. I welcome the opportunity to support my colleague Stephen Donnelly in this private member's bill. I welcome the INMO and the PNA to the gallery. This issue, it's unfortunate that the nurses felt it necessary to issue with strike action in order to get a hearing, but unfortunately that is what has happened, and I support them fully in their calls. There is a recruitment and retention crisis, and unless we do something about pay and conditions, we're not going to solve it. And Minister, I submitted a parliamentary question in December around the psychiatric nurses recruitment, and for 2018 I asked how many contracts were awarded and how many of those were permanent and how many were temporary. The reply I got was 176 contracts in 2018 were awarded, of which 56 were temporary contracts, in other words 33%. So, Minister, how in a crisis situation are we going to solve the situation by offering temporary contracts to 1/3 of those we employ? If you want to keep on to people, you offer them training, education, pay and conditions and permanency. The same figure could be applied to the INMO temporary contracts. If we want to deal with this crisis realistically, pay is an extremely important issue. Conditions are equally important, but providing people with permanency so they can plan their lives is just as important. And I would ask you to include that in your negotiations in solving this issue, which we have to solve. We have to pay our nurses the money that they deserve, and we have to give them the terms and recognition and the contracts that they also deserve. Thank you.
I'd like to start by welcoming Phil and the other nurses in the gallery and to thank you on behalf of the public for the Trojan work you do. Minister, it is reflective of the priorities of this government when we find ourselves here this evening debating another instance of pay parity within our public sector. I regularly come across nurses in my constituency of Cork South West. Indeed, many of my closest friends are nurses. We all know how hard they work and the huge responsibility that is on their shoulders. And to think that they have to take such drastic measures just to ensure that their pay scale is in line with comparable colleagues is quite frankly unacceptable. There was such hopes for the findings of the Public Service Pay Commission, and I know that the union, specifically the INMO, were hoping that the Commission would reflect their plight. However, it is quite disconcerting to see that the unions were not engaged at all in relation to any type of pay review exercise. In fact, they were precluded even from recommending pay rises. In addition, the Commission made no reference to a crisis in relation to the recruitment and retention of staff and other comparable medical professionals. That's not to mention the disparity between them and other frontline staff. This really makes them feel undervalued. Fair play is what is being requested here, Minister, and I sincerely believe that pay parity is the least these health professionals deserve. I cannot for the life of me understand these findings when it comes to well-documented that huge staff shortages in areas such as child and adolescent mental health services. The very fact that services such as this has to rely heavily on agency staff is indicative of the shortage crisis. And my time is gone, Minister, but please, please support the nurses.
Mr McGrath, Minister Donoghue. Which order? Yes, please.
First of all, I want to thank my colleagues, the deputies, for raising this motion on such an important issue. It has been good to have an opportunity to debate concerns have around this impending dispute strike by the INMO and the PNA. The government's counter-motion sets out the route for this dispute to be resolved, and that is through engagement. I and the Independent Alliance appreciate the strength of feeling amongst nurses about their pay and conditions. Many of us have family members and friends who are nurses, and we totally understand their concerns. But we do want solutions. It has been mentioned again and again in the debate on this motion that the nursing profession is of a vital importance to the health sector, and we all agree on that. A nursing strike will therefore have a huge impact on the health service and would affect the vast majority of patients in hospitals throughout Ireland. Services will not only be affected on the day of the strike, but in the days leading up to the strike and afterwards. The government acknowledges, and the Independent Alliance acknowledges, that an overwhelming majority of the membership of the unions voted to go on strike. I heard some constructive suggestions on sláinte care, on the high cost of agency staff and the issue of permanency. We want to assure the Dáil that we are sincere in seeking a way to avoid this strike. The mechanisms are there to seek a resolution. The government is willing to engage with the unions within the confines of the Public Service Stability Agreement, which the nursing unions committed to in 2017. The PSSA is the deal that is in place for the entire public sector. The government gave our commitment to that, as did the nursing unions and other trade unions. Under the conditions of that agreement, we cannot make special provision for a pay deal for only the nursing unions. Health sector management met with the nursing unions yesterday to attempt to seek a solution to this dispute. These and other engagements are the way to seek a resolution. The Government is committed to finding a fair solution that will keep health services running. A meeting with the National Oversight Body will also happen later this week, and health sector management will meet nursing unions again on Monday next week, and we all want a resolution. As outlined under the Public Sector Stability Agreement, nurses can expect to see significant increases in pay, and I very much welcome that. Also, the deal for the new entrants, including nurses, will mean that nurses and midwives will start seeing the benefit of the deal from March of this year. Issues with recruitment and retention, which have been highlighted in this debate, and I take on board the points made by many deputies, will still require attention, and no doubt about that. However, there are gradual improvements being made in the nursing numbers. The Taoiseach spoke yesterday and gave some figures that are helpful for comparing how far we have come in Ireland since the recession. The number of nurses employed in the public health service in the past 5 years increased by 2,330. And from 2017 to November 18, the number of nurses increased by 860, not including student nurses. In the original motion, the comparison between 2008 and 2018, but I do not need to remind deputies that in between these times, this country went through a serious economic downturn. The Government supports the Public Service Pay Commission's finding that a general pay increase will not solve recruitment and retention issues overnight. The Public Service Pay Commission made recommendations which will have direct benefit to the nursing profession. These include a 20% increase in local and qualification allowances for nurses, as well as accelerated promotion for nurses to senior staff nurse level. This represents a further investment of 20 million in our nursing workforce. These measures can support nurses in their essential day-to-day work and can create real opportunities for the profession in the future. Finally, unfortunately, these proposals have been rejected by a vote of the membership of the nursing unions, but the Government would encourage them to reconsider and will continue to do so. I urge all deputies to support the Government's counter-motion, which recognises the best way forward to prevent this strike is for all parties to come together and use the existing industrial relations machinery of the state. It is important, though, that whatever solution is reached must be within the parameters of the Public Service Stability Agreement. Thank you, Cavan.
Thank you, Cavan. I want to open, as Minister McGrath did, by acknowledging the immense contribution that our nurses make in our hospitals, in our primary care centres, every day, in every community and in every part of our country. And I'm very much aware of this contribution. And what I'm equally aware of, though, Cavan, is the contribution that many other public servants make to our economy and to our society. And Deputy Cahill, in his contribution, made a point in which he said let's go ahead and make additional pay available to the nurses. And let's not deal with the fact and with the risk that there could be knock-on claims. That is not something that is an option that is open to any government to do. Many colleagues and deputies have understandably made reference to the fact that we have nurses here in our gallery this evening. We want to recognise the contribution that they have made. The empty chairs in our gallery would quickly be filled with every other public servant who would ask, why can the same money not be made available to them? Agreements were made with public servants on the basis of integrity around our wage policy, of saying that a certain amount of money is available in any given year, which is between a quarter and a third of what we spend each year, and that is set aside for pay. In addition to that, we have put in place a plan of €1.1 billion of additional wage changes and increases, all of which are deserved by our public servants. And when we made that agreement with them, we as a government, underscored by elements in this Dáil, said that is the best that is available to them. And on the basis of that, the agreement was made. What I would ask colleagues and deputies here in the Dáil is the answer that will then be given to those who are campaigning and those who care about the new entrant issue, particularly in the teachers' unions? What would we say to the armed forces who are engaging with the Public Service Pay Commission? What would we say to all other civil and public servants who were told this is the most that we can pay to you? And that is the risk, and that is the huge challenge that the government and the Oireachtas will have to deal with. The challenge of, if we say to a group, this is the most that is available, why that can then be changed in fuss of any industrial action. Let me be clear about two aspects of that industrial action. The first one is the government will do all that can be done through the Public Service Stability Oversight Group, through the bilateral contact that we are having between the HSC and the nurses to resolve this issue. The second point that I need to emphasise is the scale of this industrial action. The timing of it is designed to maximise the impact that it will have on patients and on patients' operations and on pre-planned activity, all of which will have a big impact on those we care about and those we represent. And at the heart of this is our ability to strike the balance between public pay needs and the needs to be able to invest in all of the services, all of the capital investment that this Oireachtas wants to, getting the balance between both. And the reality that this Dáil alone, and I as Minister for Public Expenditure, had to deal with the last chain event, when one decision was made in relation to one group of public servants, within 24 hours, the same needs crystallised with every other public servant. And that is the great risk and the great challenge that we face. And what I would say to all of those within the main opposition party in Fianna Fáil who have spoken on this, many of you have raised the issue here, and I've heard each of you say, pay more to the nurses now. And I can understand why you would say that, given the care that you see, which is the same care I see in my community and in my constituency. But that's not what this motion says. What this motion says is set up a commission. I've already dealt with what is the risk, which is a risk we need to deal with in terms of doing more for one group, but equally going down the route of a commission here, every other need within our public service would then ask for the same judge-led commission for their approach. The consequence of which collective wage agreements, of which your party was one of the catalysts of looking at how collective wage agreements can responsibly meet the needs of our society while meeting the needs of those who provide those public services. That route will spell massive difficulty for the ability of this wage agreement to stay in place, the ability for any future wage agreement to be negotiated at the very time we are facing such risk to our economy. And I will end where I began by underscoring the huge respect and appreciation that I have for the work that our nurses do all over the country, but asking all to consider that while meeting the need that they articulate there is something that many are willing to speak up and ask for that to be happened. How are we going to meet the consequences of meeting that one need when this need alone within our nursing union and within those who work in our nursing services is in effect a 12% wage increase within that part of our public civil service? How will you then respond back to the fact that the expectation of that across the rest of those who work for the state will be created and will be demanded? And the challenge in meeting that is too great, which is why, as Minister McGrath has said, we will do all we can inside the current wage agreement to respect the wage agreement, to not change it, to see if the machinery of state and the way in which we can engage with those who work within and for the nursing unions, if this issue can be dealt with.
Thank you, Minister. Now we're going to conclude. Deputy Eamon Scanlon, sharing time with 3 colleagues.
Thank you, Minister. ballot is not just about wage increases, it's also about patient safety. The HSE has not been able to recruit and retain enough nurses and midwives, so the health service is understaffed. Nurses are working 12-hour shifts and often running into 13 and 14 hours. They rarely get out on time and are constantly contacted on days off for overtime work. They work exceptionally hard, and people forget that they have families as well to look after. That's often forgotten in this argument. And caring for everyone, and I don't believe they're rewarded in the way they should be. In Australia, the maximum amount of patients in a nurse's care is 6. In Ireland, it can be between 15 and 20. That speaks for itself. And I believe nurses' morale is at an all-time low at the moment. After year one, a staff nurse earns 31,000 approximately, a Garda 32,000, respiratory technician 37,000, occupational therapist 37,000, and all the other grades, and a teacher nearly 38,000. And that's all since January 2011. Nursing is the lowest of all these professions, despite being a degree-only profession. Nursing is an increasingly complex role with an ageing population with multiple comorbidities and complex care needs, and where new technologies are in place to keep people living longer and healthier. The hourly rate for new nurses in Ireland is 29% lower than the US, 27% lower than Canada, 26% lower than Australia, and 19% lower than England. Now, I have a lot more to say, but I just want to mention as well, a number of years ago we had an issue with Garda pay. That was resolved by recognising the fact that guards work unsociable hours, that they work days, nights, weekends, holidays, Easter, Christmas, round the clock. Nurses are in the same category. Nurses do the very same hours, and I believe that they should be treated the same. And this situation could be resolved using that principle that was used in relation to the Garda pay claims. And I just want to say, I'm 30 years in politics, Minister, over 30 years, and I've never before have got the number of emails from patients supporting the nurses, people who are too sick to come out and support the nurses, and asking us to support the nurses' cases. And I'd ask you, Minister, to do the same. Thank you.
And I want to thank my colleague, Deputy Donnelly, for putting forward this motion. And the Minister for Public Expenditure Finance is correct. The motion is narrowly tailored. But actually, Minister, if what we're calling for in this motion were accepted by the Government, it could have a significant impact on this industrial relations dispute. And our motion also says that we agree that the strike is not in the best interest of patients. But really what is shocking is that no substantive engagement, as the motion says, has taken place so far. And that's what needs to happen. And I'm strongly urging you to do that and to listen to what the nurses are saying and talk to them. Because always in industrial relations, there is room to talk. Always. And I'm strongly encouraging the Government to do that. And you've come in here this evening, Minister, with very smooth mood music. But the truth is some of your colleagues have not been the same, and they've set a very bad mood music for this particular strike by immediately coming out and attacking the INMO, instead of actually leaving the industrial relations processes to work their way through and for government to talk. Your backbenchers were out attacking the nurses, Minister Regina Doherty, whatever the views of it, but misrepresenting what the nurses were saying on television is not helpful to the process. What would be helpful to the process would be for you, Minister and Minister for Health, to set in motion what our motion asked for, what Deputy Donnelly very reasonably asked for. And it is true that nurses are extremely hard working. They don't get breaks most of the time. Those who work in hospitals, they simply they're not able to take the breaks. Those who work in residential care units don't get any break at all in their 12-hour shift. They go in early, they leave late because they have to hand over, and in some cases they're not paid for handover time. They have to work on sociable hours, but they know that they've signed up for that, but the state needs to recognise that. Tá mission seo ag tacu leis an rún seo ach níl muid ag lorg ach gárod go mé comisiún tá bretheh ag ganas ar an comisiún sin chun I dul in lech leis an bhaib seo agus go mac cainteanna idir an rialtas agus na banaltrí agus na ceart cumann chun go méach réiteach ar an bhaib seo agus nach méach stalc ar siúl ag deireadh na míosa seo.
I'd like to welcome President of the INMO, Martina Harkin-Kelly, and General Secretary Phil Hay here today with their colleagues. Thanks for taking the time. Minister, in your response, you gave some analogies, and it's not comparing like with like. We all know there's pay agreements. We all know, and the INMO are well aware of the fact that there isn't 300 million available today to deal with this issue all in one go. However, it is incumbent upon us to lay out a pathway to do it, and the existing industrial relations apparatus will not do that. This is an old adage around for many years in terms of the equality of status. You yourself gave a flawed analogy of the Defence Forces, who do require more fair pay, but you're comparing 17 weeks in recruitment training to 4 years in professional development that these people have done. There is no allowances for the mentoring that goes on in terms of somebody who is just qualified, being brought along to develop their confidence, to be an autonomous professional. That's something that could be dealt with. The Minister was here earlier, made reference to the fact to a constructive engagement yesterday. Well, the word around the campfire is it wasn't very constructive at all. It was superficial. We have nothing for you. What are you doing here? And that's not what I hope is going to happen in the coming weeks. So what's needed to happen is to develop a pathway whereby we're going to say in this state we value a 4-year degree course and the professionalism shown by these people, and we're going to put you on the same wavelength, in the same ballpark or even league as those other allied healthcare professionals that you were entitled to. And it's incumbent on this House to lay out that. Existing pay agreements is not the apparatus for that, and it requires something different. And I want to put the nurses' mind at ease. I know colleagues earlier used the suggestion of the establishment of an expert commission. Don't cast your mind back to 1998 and the Commission for Nursing that was set up then, which I know was smoke and mirrors with very little outcome. What we want is a short period of time and a professional look at this to give you people parity in what you're entitled to the other allied healthcare professionals. And one way, if there is little things to be done now, one thing you could do, Minister, is tell no negotiators not to be superficial in engagement in the next meeting and come in and say, in the context of mentoring, that we will provide allowances for that as a small branch, a small olive branch to a broader intention to give them the professional and their professional qualifications, the recognition they deserve. Thank you.
To complete.
I'd like to thank all the contributors to tonight's debate. I'd like to acknowledge the 3 ministers who spoke. I'd also like to acknowledge the constructive approach that was taken to the amendment by various non-government groups. I would, of course, like to add my welcome to the nurses, the midwives, the INMO, the PNA for coming here this evening. So, where are we at after all of this? 2 government ministers have said that the solution needs to be within the Public Service Stability Agreement, and we agree. And we tabled this amendment very, very carefully to ensure that we can do that. The PSSA allows for measures targeting recruitment and retention. Now, to repeat, in Galway, 1 in 3 operating theatres are closed because they can't hire theatre nurses. 1 in 4 vacancies being applied for 1 in 4 vacancies are being applied for at the moment. The HSC submission, which didn't make it into the final report, states, quote, "The overall picture of nursing and midwifery workforce is one of a constant challenge to effectively recruit and retain to meet ever-increasing service demands. The stability and sustainability of the workforce throughout the year is challenging, subject to peaks and troughs, particularly in relation to graduates. These challenges need to be viewed from the lens of increasing health service demand." And it goes on to talk about the real issues in recruitment and retention. DEPR has insisted, we are told, that it will not bring forward proposals for additional pay as part of the moves to avert the strikes. Now, the Minister for Health praised nurses and midwives in his contribution, but having done so, the next word in his speech was, however. He stated that he was, quote, "eager to come to a fair and satisfactory solution," and yet not once in his contribution did he address the unfair and unsatisfactory situation which exists, which is that a 22-year-old graduate nurse walking in the front door of a hospital on his or her first day of work, standing beside a 22-year-old graduate physiotherapist, both honours degree level graduates, the nurse is paid €7,000 less. So if the Minister really wants a fair and satisfactory solution, The government must address the unfair and unsatisfactory reality, which is what the INMO are bringing to bear, which is what is causing recruitment and retention, which is having a serious knock-on effect on patient care. In my experience, this government, I'll finish on this, this government is not good at listening to those working in healthcare. It's not good at listening to doctors, it's not good at listening to consultants, it's not good at listening to dentists, and it's clearly not good at listening to nurses and midwives. This evening, I did not hear a government listening to what the nurses and midwives are asking for. I did not hear their arguments being engaged with. I heard a lot of reasons why their arguments cannot be engaged with. It is time that this government recognised the reasonable questions being put forward by the INMO. Why are the same level graduates, a nurse and a physiotherapist, paid €7,000 in the difference? If the government, and I'll finish on this, thank you, Lascian Corla, if the government begins to engage and if the government begins to address these real concerns and if the government sets up an independent commission to address these and many other issues,